Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay,
Let's
perfect.
see. Yes, we see it.
Okay, so I think this is going to. I've been listening to all the other presenters, and it's been great. And I think this is going to sort of round it out, and complete the circle, so to speak. It's talking about sustainable animal agriculture and why it's a hoax. So my talk is in 4 sections. First, I'm going to talk about the background and context of this. And then I'll talk about regenerative animal agriculture and why it is a gaslighting. So this is why I use Ingrid Bergman's picture in the back. It's a gaslighting of it's trying to tell us something is true when it isn't, and vice versa. And then I'll talk about our white paper, the animal agriculture white paper, and the key findings in our white paper. And then I'll go through why this is not sustainable and basically ask it in the form of questions. So you can decide whether you think it's sustainable or not. So the background and context, so we have to look at this from a holistic perspective and in the environment as well. So I use the analogy of Michelangelo. After he finished sculpting David, imagine that you find him trying to kill himself. And you ask, why are you trying to kill yourself? And he says, how can I clean up the mess that I've made on the floor with all these pieces of marble? And how can I clean that up with a hammer and a chisel? You have to tell him, look, you have to stop using a hammer and chisel. You have to start using a bucket and a shovel, and then we can clean it up, and then we can enjoy the David you created. Right? So this is exactly the situation we find ourselves in as a species today. We have done something absolutely amazing, but then we are trying to use the same tools that we use to create that, to try and clean up what we have done. And you cannot do that. You have to use a different set of tools. But in the process, we are literally trying to kill ourselves off. So in nature, every species has a role. And at first, it may seem like the species is being destructive. Like if you look at this elephant breaking branches of trees, you may think this elephant is very destructive to the forest. But then when you step back and you observe what is happening, you'll see that wherever the elephant broke branches of trees, that's where the sunlight streams and nourishes the underbrush. So even though it seemed destructive at one level, at a higher level, it is actually constructive for nature. So in the same way, we have been doing something constructive, even though it seems destructive at one level. So the role for human beings is to be the climate regulators of planet Earth. This is not a role that we asked for, but we have it. Whether we like it or not, we are impacting the climate of the planet, and whether we like it or not, it is completely under our control right now. Okay, so we are the climate regulators of planet Earth. And you can see this happening within the context of the last 3 million years and what the Earth went through over the last 3 million years. So the last 3 million years, the Earth has gone through over 100 ice ages and interglacial periods between the ice ages. So here we have, I'm showing you the temperature of the Earth over the last 700,000 years, okay? And the white is temperature, and as it goes up, that's when the temperature is high, and we are out of an interglacial, we are in an interglacial period. And when the temperature is low, we are in an ice age. So you can see most of the time we were in an ice age. The Earth was in an ice age. And the difference between an interglacial period, a low period here, and the high period is about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a huge temperature change, right? So we have gone through so many ice ages and interglacial periods. And in the current interglacial period, which is shown at the end here, you can see that something amazing happened. So this interglacial period was exactly like the interglacial period that happened 3 ice ages ago. But 3 ice ages ago, we went back to another ice age within 5,000 years. But in this interglacial period, we were going to go back to another ice age, but then we stepped out of it. So if you look at the graph, that's what's going on here. And we did that by pumping up carbon dioxide, because you'll see the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere pretty much coincides with the temperature. It's very similar, right? So there is a cause and effect going on here. And in this case, by increasing the CO2 in the atmosphere, we prevented the Earth from going back to another ice age. And you see that in the ice core record. So you see, if you look at the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, 10,000 years ago, we came out of the ice age, and then we were going down exactly like we were doing in 3 ice ages ago. And then about 6,000 years ago, you see a deviation from what happened 6,000 years ago, 3 ice ages ago. So this is the human effect. And we did this by basically deforesting like crazy. You see that in the carbon dioxide levels, and you see that also in the methane levels. The same thing happens. So by doing that, by just doing agriculture and destroying forests, we prevented the Earth from going back to another ice age. And we actually kept the temperature constant for 10,000 years, which is shown here. See, we came out of the ice age, and then the temperature was going to go back to another ice age 6,000 years ago. Instead, we kept it constant by deforestation and animal agriculture. And then over the last 200 years, we discovered fossil fuels, and we burnt them up, and we created the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution. And in the process, we created all the tools and technologies we need to understand what we did for the last 10,000 years. And now we are at the threshold of making a decision. Which way do you want to go? If we continue doing what we are doing, we are going to kill ourselves off. So this is the suicidal Michelangelo, right? Or if we now all go vegan and we bring back the forests that we destroyed, we can literally reverse climate change. And then we can bring the temperature back to the thermostat setting and keep it there for as long as we want. Because we now have the tools and technologies to do that, to truly become a thermostat species. So this is the decision point that we are in today. Do we go along the green path, or do we go along the black and red path? And the UN met in 1992 in Rio, and they figured out that we are in a huge environmental mess. And so they identified 3 major environmental problems that need to be addressed. The first was the Convention on Biological Diversity, that we were destroying biological diversity on the planet. And so they formed the Convention of Biological Diversity, and its purpose was to conserve biological diversity on the planet and to ensure the sustainable use of its genetic resources. So this was one of the conventions that was formed at the UN in 1992. They formed another convention called the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. This is to reverse and prevent desertification and land degradation on the planet. So this was the second convention they formed. And the third convention they formed was the Convention on Climate Change, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And its purpose is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. Now, it turns out that the first 2 problems that they identified that they have conventions on, the leading cause is animal agriculture. And it's obvious, everybody knows it. That's why we are killing wild animals. That's why we are turning forests into deserts. So it was clear that those 2 were caused mainly by animal agriculture. So the UN over time has stopped emphasizing those 2 and started emphasizing just climate change. Because in climate change, they're trying to tell a story that it is really not animal agriculture. It is caused by fossil fuels. Okay? And it is actually not true. It is also caused by animal agriculture. And the reason we are lying about this to the whole world is because of what President George H.W. Bush said in 1992. He basically went to Rio and he said to the UN, the American way of life is non-negotiable. So now everyone is trying to figure out how to make the American way of life continue and still address environmental problems. And it's almost impossible. Okay, so we are now trying to mold the truth so that it fits within the American way of life. Personally, I think it's not the American way of life that's non-negotiable. It's the American ideals, the ideals of equality, the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are non-negotiable, not the consumerism. Anyway, because of that, we are trying to frame the science in a way that doesn't affect the American way of life. And I'm going to use the analogy of the house fire that we had in our house. This happened to us in 1993, actually a year after the Rio Summit. And you can see that the garage is burning, right? And the garage was burning because I had bought a brand new car and parked it in the garage the previous night. Okay, it was a brand new car that I parked in the garage the previous night. And the car caught fire the next morning and burnt our house. Now, when I called the dealer and I said, "What the hell did you sell me?" He said, "Oh my God, it happened to you." And he gave me a number of an engineer to call in the car company. And I talked to the engineer, and the engineer said, "Yeah, we have had this problem that the cars are catching fire. And yours is the 8th car that caught fire. And headquarters is waiting for 10 cars to catch fire before they issue a recall on the car." So I said, "Okay, well, and then he explained to me how it happened. He said, they tried to put a V8 engine inside a V6 compartment. And so in the process, they routed the fuel line close to a heater, and the fuel line, when it leaks, it causes the heater to just ignite." Okay. So he explained to me how it happens, and mine was the 8th car that caught fire, and they're waiting for 10. Now, the reason I tell you this is because of what happened after the fire. After the fire, an academic, a physics professor from the University of Pennsylvania, came to examine our fire. And I noticed that he was not looking at the car at all. He was looking at everything else but the car, because he was hired by the car company. And his job was to find an alternate explanation for the fire that does not involve the car. So we are now trying to find an alternate explanation for climate change that does not involve the American way of life. And that's what our climate scientists are trying to do. The IPCC is trying to do. Okay, so the IPCC is a political body around science. And the purpose of the political body is to create that kind of story. So when your house is on fire, what is the first thing we should do? In our case, we ran out of the house, but today, if our whole planet is on fire, there is nowhere to run. We cannot run out of the house, okay? So I say the first thing we need to do is to stop throwing fuel on the fire. And that is veganism. Going vegan is about just stop throwing fuel on the fire. And then when we convince other residents in our house to stop throwing fuel on the fire, that's vegan advocacy. Now, when we go vegan and then we do vegan advocacy and we convince our fellow residents to stop throwing fuel on the fire, all we have done is prevented the fire from getting any bigger. Then we have to put out the fire. And I'm going to talk about the 7 core shifts that we need to do to put out the fire. And then we have to rebuild our home. And that is what we are trying to do in the Vegan World 2026 project at Climate Healers. Figuring out the institutions, the infrastructure, the constitution, and the currency that needs to be put in place for us to have a completely vegan world within the next 7 years, 6 to 7 years. But we are facing the other side. The other side has basically determined, just like the car company did not want to speak about the car until 10 cars caught fire, there are prominent environmentalists who do not want to talk about veganism until the human population is down to 1 billion. So this is what one prominent environmentalist told me. He said, "Don't talk about a vegan world because the world will not go vegan until the human population is down to 1 billion. Now, I disagree with him, profoundly, because veganism is growing exponentially right now. And it's happening in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, in all the developed countries of the world. That's where it's happening. Okay? It's happening, it's growing exponentially. And this is why fast food corporations are offering, vegan meat options. Not because they want to promote veganism, because they have no choice. The demand is growing. And if they don't have a vegan option, people are not going to come to their businesses. So this is a grassroots movement that is causing changes in corporate behavior. Okay? Right now it's at the level of food. But if you look at how fast it's changing, between 2014 and 2017, according to the survey from Global Data, which was reported in Forbes magazine, there was a 600% increase in people identifying as vegans in the US. So that's a factor of 7 increase between 2014 and 2017. If we just maintain that same rate of growth, by 2020, it'll be another factor of 7. By 2023, it'll be another factor of 49. And by 2026, it'll be a factor of 343. Which means, and we know that in 2016, 3% of the US was identified as vegan. Okay, 3% of US adults identified as vegan in the year 2016. So if we just maintain the current rate of growth of veganism, it will be a completely vegan world by 2026. So we are on track. We have to maintain this rate of growth, and then we have to make sure that the institutions, the infrastructure, and the constitution, and the currency is all in place when this happens. But the other side that wants to maintain the current system of normalized violence is telling us stories, is trying to derail the movement. And one of this is regenerative animal agriculture, which is a gaslighting that's happening. You see, there are 2 main engines that we have created, 2 main machines that we have created as humanity that's causing the environmental problems. First is the killing machine, which is signified by animal agriculture. The killing machine kills an estimated 1 to 3 trillion animals every year. Okay, to put that in perspective, we kill more animals in 4 to 12 hours than all the humans that ever died in wars throughout human history put together. That is the killing machine that's constantly working, that's constantly killing. We're killing in the ocean, we're killing in the forests, we're killing on land, we're killing, it's a continuous machine of killing that's happening. And then we also have a burning machine, which is the fossil fuel burning machine that's driving our industrial processes. So these are the 2 main engines that are causing the environmental problems. And the way the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is framing the story of climate change, they're telling us to only look at the burning machine. Don't look at the killing machine. Even though the burning machine, 30% of the burning machine is really used to drive the killing machine too. Okay, so they both are connected. Now, if you look at the killing machine and how it has grown. So 10,000 years ago, the weight of all the wild animals was about 200 million tons. And human beings were a tiny little blip on top of that. So 10,000 years ago, from an ecological perspective, it was okay that human beings were predators because our population is small compared to the population of the animals we were preying upon. But by 1970, we had killed 60% of the wild animals by weight. Okay? And our population had become equal to the weight of all the wild animals that lived 10,000 years ago. And we still wanted to be predators. And how can you be a predator population that's much bigger than the prey that you're preying upon? So this is why we have to raise all these farmed animals. And the farmed animals now were double our weight, but they were eating 3 times as much food as we eat. So as far as the planet is concerned, they present the profile of a biomass that's 3 times our weight. That was 1970. Between 1970 and 2010, we doubled our population and we killed 52% of the wild animals by weight. So they were now down to less than 20% of what they were in 10,000 years ago. Okay. And on top of that, our wild animals, our farmed animals are now eating almost 5 times as much food as we eat. So they present the profile of a biomass that's 5 times our biomass. So almost 9 times the biomass of all the wild animals that lived 10,000 years ago. So you can see that the killing machine is the #1 reason why animals' biodiversity is dying out. Okay, the #1 reason why the biodiversity is dying out is the #1 reason why the deserts are growing on the planet. So this is why they try to distract us from this issue and focus us on just climate change, where they can blame the burning machine. More than half of the biomass that we extract from the planet is used to just feed our animals. In fact, we eat about 1.5 billion tons of food. That's our intake here. But we extract 6 times as much food from nature, because most of what we extract, we feed to our animals. This is why our animals present the profile of a biomass that's 5 times our biomass. Right? So if we went directly and ate plant foods directly, we only need to extract 1/6 the food that we extract today from nature. And the rest can be given back to wild animals. And so we can bring their population back. And our animals, our farmed animals, are everywhere on the planet. If you look at the distribution of, say, cows on the planet, you can see them spread out throughout the planet. And they're occupying 37% of the land area of the planet just to graze. And they're eating into the existing forests. You can see, the cows are surrounding the Amazon, the cows are surrounding the Congo. And wherever the animals are, that's where we have the least amount of carbon storage on land. So we have impacted the carbon cycle by cutting down forests and turning forests into grazing land. And wherever the grazing land exists, you can see that there is very little carbon being stored. Where there is dark, there's a lot of carbon being stored. Now, why is this important? Because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing climate change. And on land, there is 3 times as much carbon as in the atmosphere. So if we just bring back the balance on land, of carbon on land, then we can literally reverse climate change, because land has 3 times as much carbon as the atmosphere. And we have to just take down, reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere by 30%, which means we have to increase the carbon on land by 10%. Can you not do that? Take a look. If you just bring back the original forest, we can easily increase it by 10%, right? But this is not what we are doing today. Today, we are actually burning pasture land every year. Why do we do that? Why do we burn pasture land every year? Because we don't want anything to grow on that land that our cows cannot eat or a goat cannot eat. So if anything is growing, that means that the cows didn't eat it last year. So which means you have to burn them so that it doesn't get bigger and bigger and take over the land. Okay. So we are trying to maximize how much feed we are getting for our animals on the land we are using for our animals. This is why we burn it every year. These are the fires that happened between May 1st and May 10th of 2019. And so that happens mostly in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And then in Southern Hemisphere, we tend to do it during December, and that's where all the Australian fires started happening. So if you look at the total usage of land, 12% of the land of the planet is used to raise is for crops for animals and crops for human beings and for fuel. Half of the cropland is used to feed animals. 1/4 is used to feed human beings. Okay, So there's really only about 3% of the land now is for human beings alone. Then 37% of the land area of the planet is used to graze our animals. On that 37% of the land area of the planet, we are only storing 2% of the carbon on land. Because we only let things grow on that land that our cows can eat. Okay, so now if you do regenerative animal farming, basically all you're saying is I'm not going to burn every year. So if I don't burn the pasture land every year, yeah, it becomes wild. As it grows, as other things start growing, you're going to increase the carbon on land, but then there'll be less and less for the cows to eat for a given area of land, which means you'll need more land to raise the same number of cows. And where is that land coming from? It's not going to come from the logging, timber area. It's going to come from wild animals, forests. They only have 9% of the land right now. Is that the trade-off we want to do? Increase the grazing land and take it from forests? Is that what we want to do today? But that's exactly what regenerative animal agriculture is trying to tell us. They're trying to tell us, hey, you have a problem, so I'm going to now increase the amount of land we need, to raise the same number of animals so that it looks like we are regenerating biodiversity on the land. So now let me go through the key findings in our white paper. So what we are saying is that the killing machine, the animal agriculture, is responsible for 87% of human-made greenhouse gases emissions annually. So on an annual basis, it is the leading cause of climate change. And we come up with this number based on the amount of CO2 that is being emitted by animal agriculture, and also the amount of CO2 that we are avoiding being sequestered by raising animals. Because on that land, if we didn't have animals, all that forest will come back and that will store an extra carbon, right? So the difference between eating animals as we do today and a completely vegan world is between a large positive emissions of greenhouse gases to a large negative emissions, storage of CO2 that would happen, okay? And the difference between the two is 87% of the total. But you don't hear that from the IPCC. Why? Because they have been told to frame it in a way that does not impact the American way of life. So the way they break down agriculture and forestry and land use as 24%, electricity and heat as 25%, transportation as 14%, industry as 21%, etc. Okay? What they don't tell you is that some of this transport, some of this electricity, some of this industry is for raising animals. And that is not included here because you have to assign a CO2 one way or the other, right? So they tend to assign it to the transportation instead of agriculture. Okay? So by doing that, they're making it seem like it's more benign than it really is, number one. Secondly, they don't count the opportunity cost of the land use for animal agriculture. So Goodland and Anhang showed that if you take into account the amount of, all of the CO2 emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions that happen because of animal agriculture, if you take into account the portion of transportation, the portion of industry, that's all corresponding to animal agriculture, it works out to about 21.1 gigatons of CO2. And then they were saying that the opportunity cost or the negative emissions that would happen if everyone goes vegan was 11.5 gigatons. And they said, so the total is 32.6, and that was 51% of the total. Okay. Now the FAO, which is an industry body, basically had calculated it to be 7.5 gigatons in 2006, and they had no estimate on opportunity cost, and that was 18% of the total. So Goodland and Anhang basically took the FAO's work and they corrected it. They fixed all the bugs in there, and they showed where all the bugs were, okay? And they came up with 32.6. What we have done is we have taken a new paper from Nature by Searchinger et al., where they showed that the opportunity cost is actually 34 gigatons for CO2. So instead of 11.5, we replaced it by 34.5 gigatons, and we add it to the 21.1, that becomes 87% of the total. And of course, the FAO came up with a revised estimate, which they claimed is 14.5%, where they did not address any of the issues that were raised in Goodall and Anand, any of the issues that were raised in all the peer-reviewed papers that followed the Goodall and Anand work. And again, they didn't have any opportunity cost calculations. So this is completely bogus. And if we use this number, we are showing that we are literally, we are being scientifically illiterate because we don't understand the debate that happened. So please don't use the FAO's numbers. It's like using tobacco industry data on the impact of tobacco. The second key finding is that the annual methane emissions from animal agriculture alone causes more incremental global warming than the annual CO2 emissions from all fossil fuel sources combined. So when people make jokes about cow burps and cow farts, it is not a joke at all. Cow burps are causing more global warming on an annual basis than all the fossil fuel CO2 combined. And we showed that by looking at the IPCC's data and pointing out where the IPCC has miscalculated it. First of all, the IPCC calculated all of the CO2. I mean, they counted all of the CO2, even though only 45% of the CO2 goes up in the air. The rest is sucked up by ocean and land right away. So if you count just the CO2 that goes up in the air, which causes the true global warming, then it's only 17.6 gigatons of CO2. Now they counted methane over a 100-year period. So that's like saying, because methane only stays up in the atmosphere for 8 years, and then it becomes CO2. So methane, when it is methane, it's very powerful as a greenhouse gas. And then as CO2, it's like, it's normal, right? So by taking a 100-year average, they're diluting the impact of methane, making it seem more benign than it is. And at the same time, they're telling us that we are going to hell in a handbasket in the next 11 years. So how can you say both, right? So if you calculate methane on a 10-year basis, instead of 10.1 gigatons, it'll become like 47 gigatons of CO2. So it becomes the leading greenhouse gas. And then animal agriculture is causing 37% of the methane emissions, according to the FAO, which I know is also an underestimate because it is coming from an industry source. So they are saying it's 37%. And even if you take that as truth, it is 17.3 gigatons of CO2. And 85% of CO2 is from fossil fuel sources. It works out to 15.3 gigatons of CO2. So this is less than that, okay, which is what we found in the white paper. Third key finding is that the transition to a global vegan economy can sequester over 2,000 gigatons of CO2 in regenerating soils and vegetation. So that will literally return the atmospheric greenhouse gas levels to the safe zone of under 350 parts per million, while restoring the biodiversity of the planet and healing its climate. So meaning climate healing is real. It can happen in a vegan world. And we proved that, we actually showed a paper at the, presented a paper at the AGU fall meeting in 2015, and showed all the data as to why this is possible. And we showed that, if you just return the original forest that used to be there on the land that's currently being used for grazing animals, we can sequester over 2,300 gigatons of carbon or CO2, which is way more than what we need. So we have the ability to reverse climate change by just going vegan. Then finally, animal agriculture it's an oxymoron. If you talk about sustainable animal agriculture, it is an oxymoron. You cannot talk about sustainability and animal agriculture in the same sentence. Because look at sustainability is much broader concept than just, can we do this, right? Sustainability is about health. It's about environment. It's about ethics. Everything has to be taken into account when we talk about sustainability. So we did 3 documentaries. The Human Experiment, talking about the chemical pollution of the planet. And then the chemical pollution of the planet, we are pouring 250 billion tons of toxic chemicals into the environment every year. And those chemicals then work their way up the food chain, and they get more and more concentrated in animal foods. So animal foods get 10 to 100 times as much chemical pollution as plant foods. Okay, so then we persuade people to eat animal foods as they go up the economic ladder. So then they get sick when they eat those animal foods. And then we give them pharmaceuticals to treat their chronic diseases. So all of this is being done to make money. Because if we only persuade people to eat more animal foods if they have money. So if they're part of a developed nation, or in developing nations, it's those who have money who eat animal foods. Because then they can afford to pay for the medications and for the surgical procedures that they will need. So it's a process by which money is being given to us and taken away from us. So I call this the factory farming of human beings that's happening. Okay? So is this sustainable? Absolutely not. How can you continue doing this? At some point, you'll get sicker and sicker to a point where we cannot really treat those diseases that we get. This is why you see the obesity increasing and increasing in developed countries. 14 of the 15 leading causes of death in Western countries can be mitigated and even reversed with the whole foods vegan diet, which means that they were primarily the reason why we got those diseases in the first place, eating animal foods. So that is also not sustainable. We now know that if we continue doing what we're doing, then Medicare is going to be bankrupt by 2026. So that is not sustainable. Finally, the economic subsidies for meat and dairy industry is getting bigger and bigger, and that is also not sustainable. So this is the amount of meat and cheese that was stored in warehouses in the US in 2018. And you can see that in relation to the US Capitol building on the bottom right here. Finally, speciesism is not sustainable. The vegan movement is not going to tolerate this. It is going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to say no to this. So the cruelty that we cause animals, that's not sustainable, no matter how we gaslight this. Finally, animal agriculture is the foundation of colonialism, it's the foundation of racism, it's the foundation of sexism. If you look at where we are getting more and more land for grazing animals or for feeding our animals, we are taking it from forests. We're taking it from indigenous people. We're telling them, their culture is inferior to our culture, so they should get out of the way so that we can burn down their forests and turn that into soy fields or grazing land for cattle. That is colonialism 101. Telling, yes.
Just want to let you know 5 more minutes.
Okay, that's colonialism 101. And then if you look at who works in these slaughterhouses, you see people of color. You see where the slaughterhouses are located. It's near people of color. And so that is racism 101. And finally, we see who's being exploited in this animal agriculture industry. It is feminine. It's the abuse of the feminine. That's sexism 101. So colonialism, racism, and patriarchy are built into animal agriculture. So as I say, the 7 core shifts that we need to do in order to get out of this is to go from speciesism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy to veganism and radical equality, from diseases and divisions for humanity to health and unity for humanity, from destruction and pollution of the planet to remediation and regeneration of the planet, from death and cruelty to animals to love and kindness for animals, from a culture of consumption to a culture of compassion, from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance, and from a money-driven economy to a service-driven economy. And literally in the money-driven economy, we are playing the game of money, where we every day we get up and say, how am I going to make money today so that I can get what I want? In a service-driven economy, that is taken care of, and all you're doing every day is getting up and saying, how can I serve for the good of the whole? Okay? And it's basically a new game we need to create, a new way of living that we need to create. Okay, so it's transforming our story and transforming our game. So then we transform from a predator species to a caretaker species. Currently, we call ourselves Homo sapiens, which I think is incredibly egotistical to call yourself wise. I've never seen a wise person going around saying, I'm wise. And that's what Homo sapiens means. So going from Homo sapiens to Homo ahimsa, this is the term that Judy Carman has coined for who we are going to become. And Elie Wiesel said that, he said, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. So we cannot be silent about this. We have to speak up and we have to act, because this transformation is not a spectator sport. We all have to be involved in this. So thank you very much. My books are online. You can read the books at climatehealers.org. I also wrote a book. I'm a co-author of a book called Meet the Meatocracy. So you can read that, which goes into this. It's a short book that goes into the details about what I just said. And please email me at srao@climatehealers.org if you have any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sailesh. That was wonderful. So beautiful to just really incorporate so much of what is causing the suffering on so many levels on this planet. It's true, we need transformation on a massive scale, and veganism is a huge part of that, but just part of it. And there's so much more to be done. So thank you. That was really, really powerful. You just got a standing ovation in the chats. And one quick thing, there was a question about Goodland and Anig's paper. I know it was published in World Watch,
right.
But I actually tried to search for it recently and it looked like it had been taken down. Do you have a link to that you could share?
Yeah, I'll share.
If you go find it, that's fine, but yeah, eventually in the chat.
Yeah, I'm actually updating the links on our website also, because World Watch Institute is pretty much gone defunct now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I'll put the link on the chat box. Okay.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Sailesh. And we will take a 10-minute break now. So do what people need to do. And we will be back for the taking action portion of our presentation. So getting active for animals, seeing how you can use all this amazing inspirational things that you've learned today to put it to action and for the animals. Okay, I'm trying to read as we go. It looks like we're good. All right, wonderful. Yeah, put any links that you'd like in the chat, please, Sailesh, and thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. All right, everybody, we'll be back in 10.